across the UK. Overnights with Paul Ross.
And now a story for the world of science that sounds like it could be coming from science fiction. It concerns that fascinating and to some maverick inventor, Nikola Tesla, Serbian-American inventor, man who gave the world alternating current. And back in 1934, Nikola Tesla announced to the world via an American newspaper that he'd come up with something he called teleforce. The paper kind of incorrectly referred to it as a death ray. It was a proposed defensive weapon by Tesla that could, and I've got to read this because my science isn't particularly up to much, accelerated pellets or slugs of material to a high velocity inside a vacuum chamber via electrostatic repulsion and then fired them out of aim nozzles, maybe at incoming tanks, aircraft, possibly even at troops. He called it teleforce, and a lot of people since then have been dismissive of it and even said that maybe by then Nikola Tesla was on the way out the door. Maybe this was something he dreamt up. Well, I have news for those people. I'm about to meet a man who may have brought a version of this teleforce into being. His name is, and he's a very well-regarded Australian inventor and academic, Professor Adrian David Cheok joins us now live. Good morning, Adrian, if I may call you that. Have I summed that up correctly? Is it better to think of it as teleforce than some kind of death ray, as it's been called? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, and good day from Australia. Nikola Tesla named the invention teleforce, but he also actually, in interviews himself, referred to it as a death ray or death beam. So I think all of those names are essentially about the invention he invented. So he also used various names in various interviews.
And what exactly is it in layman's terms? Have I summed that up right? It's somehow based on his observations of the Van de Graaff generator, is that right?
Well, yeah, to make it, cut a long story short, essentially, the idea is to shoot out very tiny pellets of mercury, or it could be some other material. And if you've ever been to a science museum and you see the Van de Graaff generator, it's got this kind of belt going round and round, and it generates very high voltages. So what he's doing is instead of the belt, we use mercury to go round and round and be excited to extremely high voltages, about 50 million volts.
Wow! And at what stage has your work in this area got you to, Adrian? Where are we now with this teleforce, this so-called death beam?
Well, I've been working on it for about 10 years with the support of some funders and my university. So it's quite simple on paper. Tesla didn't really write down many details. It's quite simple on paper, but to actually bring it to fruition really needs a lot of effort, and it took about 10 years. But I finally managed to make all the four main points, which is you have a vacuum tube which accelerates excites the mercury to extremely high voltage in a vacuum. The reason you need a vacuum is because actually if you try to do it in air, the problem is that these mercury particles would actually start to destroy the machine, because the air has oxygen and other elements in the air, and it will react with that. So you need to do it in a vacuum. So I built the vacuum, and then the other part is the high voltage generator. It generates about 50 million volts, and then it can propel the mercury at very high voltage and high speed, about the speed of sound. Actually, because we are like nearly 100 years later from when Tesla first invented his teleforce or death beam, now it's a little bit easier to do those parts, because when he invented it, it was much more difficult with the technology of 100 years ago. But now we can use a lot of small components to do basically the same job.
I almost hesitate to ask this, Professor, but I mean, have you used this or anything? Have you tried it out and tested it and managed to destroy anything or blow anything up?
Well, the problem is, not the problem, but it is very different from conventional weapons, like, for example, if you shoot a gun or you shoot a rocket, you will see, something blowing up and you'll see fire. But the problem with this is it's very tiny particles of mercury, so you don't actually see anything explode, and it will pass right through whatever object you shoot it at. So to test it, what we did is I got chickens, not just to assure your audience, chickens from the supermarket, which are already
dead, yeah.
Already killed. Yes, and then we then looked very carefully at the effect of the beam, and then we can see that where the beam was passing through the chicken from the supermarket, you can see that it's basically like burning inside. So by extrapolation, we can safely say that it will be destructive to any kind of life form, or even things like aircraft or other objects. But my next stage is, it's a little bit too tricky now in 2021 to do any experiments like this because because of the fact we have all these animal rights and things now that we didn't have 100 years ago. So, but if I get permission, my next experiment would be try on a small creature like mice, which they use in science labs already. Which sounds a little bit cruel, and I don't really want to kill mice, but that would be the only conclusive way to show that this can instantly cause death.
I mean, we do have many ways of death dealing on planet Earth. Would your idea be that this would be used effectively, or be better used as a kind of defensive weapon, just kind of threaten people who are planning to invade somewhere, rather than be used offensively?
Yes, I think so. And the nature of the device is it can't really be moved very easily. So so it's more of a static device, that you wouldn't really move. So let's say for places like Israel, for example, where they're kind of surrounded by enemies, in that kind of case, you could set these up all across the border and use it as a kind of defensive weapon. And actually, that's what Tesla said. He said this weapon is he invented it for the purpose of defense and to stop war, not to cause destruction. But yes, I think so mainly the nature of this weapon is defensive, and it also has the added I could say benefit. Like I said, it doesn't cause like big explosions and fire and things like that. So if there really is an enemy and invading, you can precisely shoot them down, or and you wouldn't cause collateral damage from this kind of weapon if it's used in defense and as a defensive weapon. UK as well. UK is like an island, so you can imagine setting these up around the shorelines of the UK and as a defensive weapon.
Now, I must say, Professor, I first came across your name. I'm talking to Professor Adrian David Cheok, inventor, academic, in connection with your work involving human-robot interaction. Have you parked that? Or are you still ongoing with that research as well? Because that read as a fascinating piece of research, if controversial.
Yes. Well, actually, I used to be a professor in the University of London in the City campus, and I met a scientist who became a good friend, Dr. David Levy, and he wrote a book called Love and Sex with Robots, and my background is electrical engineering and artificial intelligence and these aspects. So I collaborated with him, and in hindsight, it was very interesting work. But the problem is extremely controversial. So I ended up becoming maybe more well known for the sex robots than the actual Dr. David Levy, who was the originator of this work. And I think it was really great work and very fun at the time, but it's just too controversial. And then I just became known as the sex robot guy, Aren't you worried though, Adrian, about now becoming known as the death ray guy? Yeah. So this is kind of going back to my roots because I studied electrical engineering as at university, which I highly encourage to all, girls and boys to get into science and technology. It's a great topic. So it's kind of like going back to my roots and just focusing on electronics, because it was too much about when I was working on that project with Dr. David Levy, it was too much becoming known as the sex robot man. So it became too much, and I wanted to go back to my roots of engineering.
Well, you've certainly done that now, Professor. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Fascinating, thought-provoking stuff there from Professor Adrian David Cheok, inventor, of course, and academic. You're going to meet Paul Ross and you guys on Talk Sport and Talk Radio about Teleforce.